Let's thank the daughter who actually made something of herself. My sister said it with her glass already raised. She was smiling. For 30 years, my parents had called her the gifted one and called me the backup, and now, at our father's retirement dinner, in front of 40 people, Camilla was toasting herself for a life I had quietly paid to keep standing. I didn't put down my fork. I didn't stand. I just watched the man at the end of the table set his own fork down, slide a leather folder out from under his chair, and clear his throat. He had flown 2,000 miles, not for the gifted one, for the backup. What he said next emptied the room of every word my family had ever used to make me small. I'm Susanna, 36, and the people clapping for my sister had no idea the building they were sitting in answered to me. Let me take you back to that night, before he opened the folder, while my mother was still beaming at the wrong daughter. The dinner was at the Hartwell Club, the nicest room in our town. Cream tablecloths, real candles. My father, Gerald, sat at the head like a king who'd ruled a small, mean kingdom for 40 years. He'd run the only family clinic in 3 counties. Tonight, the whole county had come to retire him. My mother, Patricia, had arranged the seating herself. She put Camilla at our father's right hand. She put me near the kitchen door, beside an empty chair and a man none of us had met. In case you need to slip out early, my mother had told me, patting my shoulder. You always have your little work things. My little work things. That was what she called the company I'd spent 11 years building from a desk in a rented garage. To my mother, Camilla had a career and I had work things. Camilla had flown in from the city that afternoon. She wore a dress that cost more than my first car and a smile she'd been practicing in the mirror since she was 6. She hugged everyone twice. She let our mother fix her hair in front of the room. There she is, our father said when Camilla walked in. His whole face changed. It lit up the way it never lit up for me. There's my girl. I'd watched that face do that my entire life. I knew exactly how it felt to stand 3 feet to the left of it. The man beside me poured himself water and said nothing. I assumed he was someone's accountant. I had no idea he'd been waiting in this town for 2 days. A woman across from me, an old neighbor named Glenda, leaned in to be kind, which in our family was always its own small cruelty. "And what are you up to these days, Susanna?" she asked. "Still doing the office thing?" "Still doing the office thing," I agreed. "Oh, that's nice," Glenda said, in the tone you'd use for a child's drawing. "Not everybody can be a go-getter like your sister. She's leading some huge development now, your mother says, east side of town. Isn't that something?" I held my water glass and said nothing, because yes, it was something. The huge development my sister was leading was a strip mall designed to bury my hospital on land she didn't know was mine, fronted by a man who'd used her the way our mother had taught the whole county to use her. It was something, all right, but I'd promised myself I wouldn't perform, so I just smiled and let Glenda go on being kind in the way that takes the skin off. "You must be so proud of her," Glenda said. "We all want the best for Camilla," I said. It was the truest sentence I'd say all night, and not one person at the table heard the second floor under it. The toasts started before the entrees came out. An old colleague stood and praised my father's steady hands. A neighbor praised his Sunday sermons of common sense. Everyone praised the clinic, the clinic, the clinic, as if my father had built it out of his own ribs. Then my mother tapped her glass and looked, the way she always looked, only at Camilla. "Some of you know," my mother said, "that we were blessed with 2 girls, and some of you know that one of them gave us so much to be proud of." She let that sit. One of them. In a room of 40 people, my mother had just split her 2 daughters into the one worth mentioning and the one near the kitchen door. I felt the old heat climb my neck. 36 years old, and a single sentence from my mother could still find the exact soft place under my ribs and press. But I'd promised myself something on the flight home. I would not perform tonight. I would not earn anything. I would not one more time try to be seen. So I folded my hands and I waited. Camilla rose. She smoothed her dress. She lifted her glass toward our father, and then she turned slowly so the whole room could admire the turn, and she said the thing that had been forming in her mouth her entire life. "Let's thank the daughter," she said, "who actually made something of herself." The room laughed the soft, agreeable laugh of people who'd had 2 drinks. My father raised his glass. My mother pressed a hand to her chest like she'd been handed something holy. And every face at that table turned, all at once, toward me, to see if the backup would flinch. I want you to understand who I was to them because the toast didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of 30 years of careful daily sorting. The story my family told about us was simple. Camilla was the gifted one. She'd read early. She'd played piano. She had what my mother called sparkle, a thing you either had or you didn't, and I didn't. I was the backup. That was the actual word. My father used it at the dinner table when I was 9, ruffling my hair, almost fond. "Camilla's our star," he said to a guest. "Susanna's the backup. Every team needs one. Every team needs one." I carried that sentence for 27 years. In our house, Camilla's report card went on the refrigerator. Mine went in a drawer. Camilla got piano lessons. I got to fold laundry while she practiced. When money was tight, and in a small clinic town money was often tight, the rule was unspoken and absolute. The good thing went to Camilla. The leftover went to me. I learned not to want things out loud. Wanting things out loud was how you got reminded you were the backup. When I was 14, I asked for an art class. My mother looked at me the way you look at a child who's confused about her own life. "Sweetheart," she said, "we can only afford one set of lessons, and Camilla has a gift. We can only afford one." I'd hear versions of that line for the rest of my life. There was only ever enough of anything in our family for one daughter, and I was never the one. I'll give you the one that still finds me at 3 in the morning. I was 16. I'd gotten into a state summer program, a real one, competitive, the kind of thing that changes a kid's whole sense of what's possible. It cost $400. I'd saved half from a job bagging groceries. I asked my parents for the other half. My mother didn't even look up from the sink. "Susanna, Camilla's got her recital dress to think about. We can only afford one big thing this summer." She said it the way you'd report the weather. "You understand." I did understand. That was the worst part. By 16, I understood completely. I didn't go to the program. Camilla got the dress. She wore it twice and left it in a closet, and I've spent 20 years building an empire out of the cold, clean fury of being a $400 afterthought in my own house. I want to be fair to Camilla here, because it would be easy not to be. She didn't ask to be the favorite. There's a version of this story where she's a villain by choice, and that version is a lie. My sister was handed a crown at birth and spent her whole life terrified of the day someone would ask her to prove she'd earned it. The favorite child isn't lucky. The favorite child is a performance that can never, ever stop. I got to fail in private. Camilla had to be a star in public, with nothing underneath every single day, forever. I wouldn't trade, not even now, especially not now. But understanding her didn't mean catching her anymore. I'd learned that the hard way in a country club dining room at the end of a toast. Here's the part that should have warned them. Quiet children watch. I spent my childhood 3 feet to the left of the spotlight, which is the best seat in the house for seeing how a room actually works. I watched who paid for what. I watched my father's clinic almost go under twice. I watched my mother smile at people she despised because they held a note on the building. I didn't learn sparkle. I learned leverage. I just didn't tell anyone. There was one night that set the whole thing. I was 11. The clinic's landlord came to dinner, a heavy man named Royce who owned the building and knew it. My father laughed too hard at every joke. My mother brought out the good plates. And at the end of the night, Royce leaned back and said, "Gerald, I might sell the building. You'll be fine, I'm sure." And I watched my father's face go gray under the kitchen light. He wasn't fine. He was terrified. The man who told me every team needs a backup was, that night, somebody else's backup, and he hated it, and I saw it. I didn't have a word for what I learned that night until years later. The word was ownership. The person who owns the room is never afraid in it. Everyone else is a guest, smiling, hoping not to be asked to leave. I decided at 11 that I would own rooms. I just never said it out loud because the backup who announces her plans gets reminded she doesn't have a gift. And when I left for college on a scholarship nobody in my family bothered to come celebrate, I made myself one promise. I would never again be in a room where someone else controlled whether I got to stay. I want to tell you how I kept that promise because it matters for what happened at the dinner. I didn't get rich the way people imagine. There was no investor, no lucky break, no rich husband. There was a garage with a space heater, a folding table, and a county nobody else wanted to bet on. While Camilla chased a title in the city, I did the boring thing. I bought small. A failing laundromat strip. A medical office nobody wanted because the anchor tenant was leaving. A parking lot. I learned to read a lease the way my father read an X-ray, fast, for the break. I learned that in a small town, the person who owns the unglamorous buildings, the clinics and the pharmacies and the offices over the bank, quietly owns the town. It took 11 years. By 35, I owned 11 buildings, employed 9 people, and had never once been mentioned at a single family dinner. My mother told the county I was still finding my footing. I let her. The footing was 40 acres deep by then. I just hadn't told anyone where. That promise and that silence are the reason a stranger flew 2,000 miles to my father's retirement dinner. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the toast and the 40 faces waiting for me to break. Before I tell you what the man with the folder said, do me one quick favor. If a family ever taught you that you were the backup, hit that subscribe button and tell me one word in the comments. Tell me what they called you. Then stay with me, because in about 10 minutes my sister is going to wish she'd never raised that glass, and you're going to want to see her face when she figures out why. Now, the toast. 40 faces turned to me. Camilla held her glass high, waiting for me to congratulate her, or cry, or leave. Those were my 3 approved roles: clap, weep, or disappear. I did the one thing the backup was never supposed to do. I smiled back at her, calm, almost kind. And I said, "Go ahead, Camilla. Tell them what you made." The smile on her face wobbled just slightly, like a candle when a door opens somewhere in the house. Because Camilla couldn't tell them what she'd made. That was the secret sitting under 30 years of toasts. My sister, the gifted one, had never actually made anything. She'd inherited a story, and she'd spent her whole life being congratulated for it in advance. Let me show you what I mean. Let me tell you about the city, and the career my mother bragged about at church, and what my sister was actually doing while everyone clapped. Camilla had moved to the city at 22 to become, in my mother's words, somebody important. The details stayed conveniently vague. There was a firm. There was a title. There was a tall building with her name somewhere inside it, my mother was sure. For 10 years, my parents told the county that Camilla worked in development, real estate, finance, the kind of thing Susanna does, but bigger. That was the family map of the world. Whatever I did, Camilla did the bigger, brighter version. The truth was smaller and sadder. Camilla had been an assistant, then a junior associate, then, 4 years ago, nothing at all. I knew because I'd hired the firm she'd been let go from. They handled a closing for me, and the senior partner, not knowing she was my sister, mentioned a young woman they'd had to release. All confidence, no follow-through, he said. Could sell you a building she didn't understand. Could sell you a building she didn't understand? I never told my parents. What would I have said? That their star had burned out years ago and was running on the light my mother kept pointed at her? So, Camilla lived in the city on a runway of small loans and large stories. And every Christmas she came home and let our parents believe the version they wanted. And every Christmas my mother turned to me and asked gently whether I'd found my footing yet. Found my footing. I owned 11 buildings. But footing, in my family, was something only Camilla was allowed to have. Here's where it turns. 2 years ago, my father's clinic started to die. It wasn't dramatic. Small clinics don't die dramatically. The big hospital system 30 miles east opened a glossy, urgent care 2 towns over. Insurance reimbursements dropped. My father, who'd never once let me near the books, was suddenly behind on the one thing that had defined him. I didn't find out from him. Of course I didn't. My father would have eaten glass before he asked the backup for help. I found out from the pharmacist, Mara, the woman whose husband had cancer. She mentioned it the way people in small towns mention bad news, sideways, over a counter. "Your dad's place is struggling," she said. "Heard the building might sell. Shame. We'd all have to drive to the city." That sentence stopped me cold. We'd all have to drive to the city. The same sentence that had killed my grandmother in the back seat of a Buick 30 years before. I went home that night and I did what I do. I pulled the records. The clinic's building was owned by a holding company called Larkspur Properties, a sleepy little entity that had collected rent for 40 years and let the roof rot, and Larkspur was quietly shopping itself to buyers. The most aggressive buyer was Cascade Regional Health, the giant to the east. They didn't want the building. They wanted it gone. A closed clinic feeds an urgent care. If Cascade bought Larkspur, my father had maybe 8 months before a certified letter ended his life's work. I sat with that for one night. One night, because here is the truth I'm not proud of. Part of me wanted to let it close. Part of me, the 11-year-old by the kitchen door, wanted my father to lose the one thing that had let him feel important enough to call his own daughter a backup. I'm telling you that because the people who pretend they never feel that are lying, and you deserve the real version. But I'd watched my grandmother die in a car. And there were 40,000 people in this county who weren't my father, who'd done nothing to me, who would simply have farther to drive to be saved. So the next morning I called Larkspur and I made an offer they took before lunch. I bought the holding company, the whole thing, quietly through one of my entities, the way I bought everything. By that afternoon, I owned the building my father had worked in for 40 years, the building he believed to his bones, that he controlled. I could have tripled the rent. Could have flipped it to Cascade for a fast profit. Could have ended Gerald Beckett's clinic with a single certified letter and let him feel, just once, what it was to sit in a room you don't own. I did the opposite. I held the rent flat. I fixed the roof that had leaked over the exam rooms for a decade. I had a contractor reseal the parking lot. I made my father's last 2 years easier than any 2 years he'd had, and I made sure he never knew where the ease came from. He thought the landlord had finally gotten religion. He retired tonight a respected man in a building everyone assumed he'd always controlled. There's a thing I did that first year that I've never told anyone. I drove to the clinic, not as the owner, as a patient. I made an appointment under a name that wasn't mine, and I sat in the waiting room of the building I now owned, in the chairs I'd just paid to reupholster, and I watched my father work. He didn't recognize me at first across the room, which tells you something all by itself. Then he did, and his face did the small disappointment it always did, and he said, "Susanna, everything all right? You don't usually come around." Like I was a draft from a window he kept meaning to seal. "Just a checkup, Dad," I said. "How's business?" He straightened. Pride is a reflex in men like my father. "Steady," he said. "Always steady. The Lord provides." Then, lower, almost to himself, "Landlord finally fixed that roof. Took him 10 years. Funny how things turn around when you've earned a little respect. Funny how things turn around when you've earned a little respect." I sat in my own building and let my father credit his own respect for a roof I'd paid to replace. And I said nothing, and I drove home. And that was the night I understood I'd never get the thing I wanted from him. Not by saving him. Not by anything. The roof didn't move him an inch closer to me. It just made him feel more deserving of the distance he kept. So I stopped expecting the dinner table to ever change, and I started building the only table that would. You already know who really owned that building. My father didn't. My mother didn't. Camilla, raising her glass, certainly didn't. The man at the end of the table did. His name was David Albrecht, and he was the chief executive of the entire regional health system. The big one, the glossy one, the one everyone in town was secretly afraid of. He had not come to a small retirement dinner by accident, and he had not come for my father. But before David Albrecht opened that leather folder, my mother did one more thing. She turned the knife she'd been turning my whole life, and this time she did it in front of everyone, and this time, finally, the wrong person was watching. Let me tell you exactly what she said. My mother, still glowing from Camilla's toast, decided the moment needed a finishing touch. She lifted her own glass and looked across the candles at me, and she smiled the smile she used in public, the warm one, the one strangers loved. "Now, Susanna," she said, loud enough for the back tables. "Don't you pout, sweetheart. Not everyone can be a Camilla. The good Lord makes stars, and He makes the rest of us. There's no shame in being practical." "There's no shame in being practical." The room chuckled. My father chuckled. Camilla beamed like a woman receiving a crown. And David Albrecht, the most powerful man in 3 counties, stopped chewing. I saw it happen. I'd spent 30 years reading the faces at this table, and I watched a stranger's face do something my family's faces had never done for me. It went still with a kind of disbelief. He looked at my mother. He looked at me. He looked at the little card by my plate that said my name, the name on every lease he'd spent the last year negotiating. He set down his fork. If you've ever sat at a table while your own mother explained to a room that you were the rest of us, you already know the silence I'm talking about. It isn't loud. It's the quietest you've ever been on the inside. You learn to hold a glass of water and feel nothing on your face while everything underneath caves in. But I'd done my caving years ago, alone, in a garage with a space heater and a list of buildings I couldn't yet afford. I was done caving. So I held my mother's eyes and I said the only thing I'd planned to say all night. "You're right, Mom," I said. "I'm very practical." She mistook it for surrender. Her whole face softened with victory. "That's my girl," she said, the words she gave Camilla, tossed to me for once, like a coin to a beggar she felt sorry for. Camilla laughed. "Honestly, Sue, it's fine. Somebody has to do the small stuff." She turned to the table. "She helps people find office space. It's very useful." She helps people find office space. The senior partner's words came back to me. Could sell you a building she didn't understand. The difference between my sister and me in one sentence, and not one person in that room knew which of us it described. That's when David Albrecht stood up. He didn't tap a glass. He didn't ask for the room. He just rose. 6 feet of quiet authority in a suit that cost more than the dinner, and the room hushed on its own, the way rooms do when real power moves. "Forgive me," he said. "I've been a stranger at your table all evening, and you've been very kind, but I flew in from Seattle for a reason, and I think I've waited long enough to say it." My father, delighted to have an important guest, gestured grandly. Of course. You're here for me, sir. Speak." David Albrecht looked at my father for a long moment, then he looked at me. "No," he said gently. "I'm not here for you, Dr. Beckett. I'm here for your daughter." My father's smile didn't move. He turned automatically toward Camilla. So did my mother. So did the entire room. Of course. The daughter. There was only ever one daughter who got flown across the country. Camilla half rose, already arranging her face into modesty. "Not that one," David Albrecht said. And he turned, and he looked at the woman by the kitchen door. "I'd love to tell you I savored it. I didn't. Not yet. Because before the sweetness comes, the part nobody warns you about. The part where everything you fought for can still slip through your hands if you flinch. Let me back up 2 days, to before the dinner, so you understand what was actually at stake in that room, and why I almost didn't show up at all." 2 days before the dinner, David Albrecht's people had called me with a problem. For a year, my company had been negotiating the biggest deal of my life. Cascade Regional Health, the same giant that almost ate my father's clinic, had a new chief executive now, David Albrecht. And David didn't want to close small clinics. David wanted to build a true medical campus in our county, not an urgent care, a real one. Cancer center, surgery, a birthing center, the kind of place where people in our town would no longer have to drive 90 minutes to be told their diagnosis. That was the strange shape of it. The company I'd bought a holding firm to defend against was now the company I was trying to build a hospital with. People change. Sometimes the giant gets a conscience. David had one. They needed land, the right land, 40 acres on the east edge of town, near the highway, near the water tower I'd grown up under. I owned it. I'd bought it 5 years earlier, quietly, parcel by parcel, while everyone in my family was asking whether I'd found my footing. I bought it because I'd watched my own grandmother die in a car on the way to a hospital that was too far away, and I'd promised myself our town would never be that far from help again. That promise was worth more to me than the toast, more than the folder, more than anything Camilla could say. So when David Albrecht's people called, it wasn't to congratulate me. It was to tell me the deal was in danger. There was a competing offer. A developer out of the city, a man named Holt who built strip malls and called them town centers, had found a crack in my position. My 40 acres had only one usable access road, a county easement that ran across a separate parcel I didn't own. Without that road, my land was landlocked. worthless, a field. And Holt was trying to buy the road parcel out from under me, which would let him hold my whole campus hostage, or kill it, and build his own development somewhere cheaper. It was a smart move. I respect a smart move even when it's aimed at my throat. With that road, the campus would be built by someone else, somewhere else, the way everything good in my life had always almost gone to someone else. I found out it was Camilla from a single sheet of paper. David's people emailed me the competing bid the system had obtained, the formal filing Holt had submitted to the county for the rezoning. I opened it on my laptop in the airport, expecting a faceless LLC. And there, on the signature page under Local Project Liaison, in a font that didn't care whose heart it broke, was a name. Camilla Beckett. I sat very still and looked at my sister's name on the document that would erase the hospital I'd spent 5 years building. I read it 4 times, the way you reread a diagnosis. There was no mistake, no coincidence of names. It was her signature, the looping confident one she'd been signing since high school, on the thing designed to end the one good thing I'd ever made. I kept that page. Not as evidence, I want to be clear, not for some courtroom moment. I kept it because I needed to hold the literal shape of it. My whole life, my family had told a story where Camilla shone and I stood in the dark. And here, finally, was the story made flat and legible on a single page. The gifted one had signed her name to its destruction. The backup had signed her name to its existence. Same county, same blood. 2 signatures. Everything our family got wrong about us was right there in 2 signatures, and only I could read both. And the person fronting Holt's offer, the local face the city developer was paying to smile and shake hands and walk the town council through it? My sister Camilla. I sat in my car in the airport parking lot and I almost laughed. Of course it was her. Broke, 4 years out of a job nobody at home knew she'd lost, desperate to finally be the somebody my mother had promised everyone she was, Camilla had taken a finder's fee to help a stranger gut the one thing I'd spent 5 years building for the town that raised us both. She didn't know it was my land. She didn't know anything. She'd been handed a story again, a story about being important, about leading a major development, and she'd raised her glass to it, the way she raised her glass to everything. I want to walk you through the 48 hours after that call because this is the part where I almost lost, the part nobody puts in the toast. My first move was the obvious one. I called my own attorney and told her to buy the road parcel before Holt could. She called back in an hour, and her voice was careful, which is never good. The road parcel was owned by an elderly couple, the Pearsons, who'd farmed it for 60 years, and the Pearsons had already signed a letter of intent with Holt. Camilla had walked them through it personally, over coffee, with that practiced smile, and the Pearsons, who'd known her since she was a girl in the church choir, had trusted her. Of course they had. Everyone trusted the gifted one. That was the whole problem with being the backup. People believed the lit one over the one in the dark every single time. So now the road I needed was promised to the man trying to kill my hospital, fronted by my own sister, signed by people who'd loved her since she was small. I had the land. I had the buyer. I had David Albrecht ready to break ground. And I was about to lose all of it to a coffee meeting I wasn't invited to. That was my false floor. That was the night I sat in a hotel room near the airport and genuinely believed the backup was going to lose again. In the dark, the way she always had, and nobody would ever even know there'd been a fight. But I'd learned one thing in 11 years that Camilla never learned in any of hers. I read what I sign. So I read the Pearsons' letter of intent, the whole thing. The way my father reads an X-ray, fast for the break. And there was the break. The letter of intent wasn't a sale. It was non-binding, contingent on the buyer closing within 30 days, and contingent on town council approval of Holt's rezoning, because the road ran through a residential overlay. No rezoning, no road. No road, no Holt. And the rezoning went to a vote on Thursday. My attorney, Renata, the one steady person who'd been with me since the garage years, told me I was insane. "You win this in a hearing room, Susanna," she said over the phone. Quietly, clean. "Why on earth would you do it at your father's party in front of your whole family?" She'd watched me take 30 years of family contempt without flinching. She didn't understand why I'd choose now, of all times, to make a scene. "Because the hearing room is where the backup wins," I told her, "and I'm tired of winning where it doesn't count." There was a pause. Renata has known me a long time. "Okay," she said finally. "Then don't go in there angry. Go in there done. Angry they can use. Done they can't touch." It was the best advice anyone gave me all week, and I carried it into that dining room like a stone in my pocket. Suddenly, the whole war came down to one room on one night, in front of the one body that decided what got built in our town. The town council. The same town council that included an old man who had stood up at my father's dinner and praised his steady hands. People who'd known both Beckett girls their whole lives and who, when Thursday came, were going to vote based on which daughter they believed. I had two choices. I could fight it in boardrooms for the next year, lawyers against lawyers, appeal the vote, and probably win, eventually expensively, and the town would never know there'd been a fight at all. Or I could go to my father's retirement dinner, the one I'd planned to skip with half the council in the room, and let the truth land where everyone could see it, 2 days before they voted. I almost chose the boardroom. The boardroom was safe. The boardroom was where the backup wins, quietly, in the dark, where it doesn't count. Then my mother called to tell me where I'd be seated, near the kitchen door, in case I needed to slip out for my little work things. I called David Albrecht. I told him about the dinner. I told him half the council would be there, and the woman fronting Holt's bid would be giving a toast. There was a long silence on the line. "I'll fly in," he said. "Some things you want to see in person." I should tell you who David Albrecht was to me, because it wasn't nothing, and it wasn't romance, and people always want it to be one or the other. He was the first powerful person who'd ever treated me like the smartest one in the room without needing to be told. A year earlier, when his people first walked my land, his analysts assumed I was a broker fronting for some bigger fund, because in their world, a woman from a town like mine didn't own 40 acres outright. David read 2 pages of my file and corrected them. "She's not fronting for anyone," he said in a meeting someone later repeated to me. "She's the fund." She's the fund! A stranger had seen in 2 pages what my family couldn't see in 36 years. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing, actually. Sometimes the person who finally sees you isn't family. Sometimes it's a tired executive from 2,000 miles away who just reads carefully. He didn't have to fly in. The deal didn't require it. The deeds spoke for themselves. He flew in because, he told me later, he'd grown up the unfavored one too, the brother nobody bet on. And when I described that dinner over the phone, something in him stood up before the rest of him decided to. Coalitions get built out of small recognitions like that. One overlooked person, decades later, refusing to let another one stand alone at a table. So when he sat down beside me by the kitchen door, the accountant nobody noticed, he wasn't there as proof. He was there as a witness. There's a difference. And it would matter before the night was over. I booked my own flight an hour later. There's one more thing that happened before the dinner, and I almost left it out, because it's the part where I gave Camilla a way out, and she didn't take it. I saw her the afternoon before the dinner. By accident, sort of. We were both at our parents' house, the house we grew up in, the house where her report cards went on the refrigerator and mine went in a drawer. She was in the kitchen, on her phone, using the voice she used for clients, the bright one, the one that could sell you a building she didn't understand. "The vote's a formality," she was saying to whoever Holt was. "These people have known me forever. It's basically done." She hung up and saw me in the doorway. For 1 second, her face did the thing it always did, the small recalibration, the gifted one deciding how much of herself to spend on the backup. She decided not much. "Sue, you came. Mom wasn't sure you'd bother." "What are you working on?" I asked. Quiet, just curious on the surface. "A development thing. East side of town. Big. You wouldn't—" She paused and chose the gentlest possible knife. "It's a little outside what you do. Office space and all that." I could have ended it right there. I could have said, "Camilla, that's my land, you're being used, walk away before Thursday, and nobody has to know." I had the words ready. Part of me even wanted to, because she was still my sister, and somewhere under the dress and the practiced smile was the 6-year-old who'd once shared a room with me and been afraid of the same dark. So I gave her the door. "Camilla," I said, "are you sure you've read everything you signed?" She laughed. Not cruelly. Worse than cruelly. Carelessly. "Sue, you don't have to understand my work to be supportive. It's okay. Just be happy for me." She squeezed my arm on her way out of the kitchen, the way you'd reassure a child. Somebody in this family had to do something big. Somebody in this family had to do something big. She had no idea she was already standing in the middle of the biggest thing I'd ever built, with a match in her hand, smiling. I let her go. I'd offered the door. She'd patted me on the head and walked past it. After that, whatever happened at the dinner, she'd chosen it. I want you to know I gave her the door. It matters to me that you know that. That night, before the dinner, I drove out to the east side alone, to the 40 acres. I parked under the water tower I'd grown up beneath, the one you can see from every part of town, the one that stands over the spot where the women's center is going now. I sat on the hood of my car in the dark and I looked at the empty field and tried to decide who I wanted to be the next night. Because here was the truth I had to face. I could win this quietly. I could let my lawyers strangle Holt's bid in procedure, keep my name out of it, keep being the backup who saves everyone in the dark and gets thanked by no one. That was the safe Susanna. That was the Susanna my family had built, the one who fixes the roof and lets her father credit his own respect for it. Or I could walk into that dining room and let them see me, all of them, just once. Not for revenge. I've watched enough of these stories to know revenge curdles. I wanted something smaller and harder than revenge. I wanted to stop being invisible in the one room that had made me invisible first. The water tower didn't answer. Water towers don't. But sitting under it, on my own land, I made the decision that ended 30 years of standing 3 feet to the left of the light. I would go. I would not perform. And when they reached for the old story, the star and the backup, I would simply, quietly, set the truth on the table and let them look at it. I drove home. I laid out the one dress I owned that my mother would hate, the plain one, the practical one. And in the morning, I went to bury a lie that was older than I was. Now you understand the folder. Now you understand why a stranger crossed the country. And now we go back to the dinner. To the exact second after David Albrecht turned to me and the wrong daughter was still half standing with her mouth open. If you've ever watched someone realize in real time that the person they spent their life looking down on was holding their whole world the entire time, drop one word in the comments right now: folder. Just so I know you're here for what comes next, because what comes next is the part Camilla will replay for the rest of her life. Not that one, David Albrecht had said. Camilla lowered herself back into her chair like a marionette with a cut string. My mother's hand was still pressed to her chest, but the holiness had drained out of the gesture. My father, for the first time in my memory, looked at me without the faint disappointment that had lived in his eyes since I was 9. David Albrecht walked the length of the table. He stopped beside me. He set the leather folder down next to my untouched plate, and he addressed the room. "My name is David Albrecht. I'm the chief executive of Cascade Regional Health." A small murmur. Everyone in that town knew the name. It was the giant they feared. For the past year, my organization has been trying to build a medical campus in this county. A real one. Cancer care, surgery, a birthing center, so your daughters don't deliver on the side of a highway. He paused on that. I wondered later if he knew about my grandmother. He couldn't have. But he paused. "We could not build it," he said, "without one person. One person had the foresight 5 years ago to secure the only land in this county where it could go. One person could have sold that land to me for a fortune and instead spent 2 years insisting the design include a charity wing, a free clinic, and a guarantee that no resident of this town would ever again have to drive 90 minutes for cancer treatment. The room was perfectly silent now. Even the candles seemed to hold still. That person, David Albrecht said, and he put his hand lightly on the back of my chair, is Susanna Beckett. Your Susanna. The reason this town is about to get the hospital, it's needed for 50 years. Nobody clapped. They didn't know how. For 30 years, this room had clapped for the other daughter. The applause muscle for me didn't exist. So they just stared, recalculating an entire family in real time. My mother found her voice first. Of course she did. There's some mistake, she said with a small laugh, the church laugh, the one that smoothed everything over. Susanna helps people find office space. Camilla's the one in development. You want Camilla. David Albrecht turned to her. He was unfailingly polite. That was the worst part for them, I think. There was no cruelty to push against. Ma'am, he said, Camilla Beckett is the local representative on a competing bid. A bid funded by an out-of-state developer who intends to buy the access road to your daughter Susanna's land, kill this hospital, and put up a strip mall. A breath. I flew here because that bid lands in front of your town council on Thursday, and I wanted, just once, to look the obstruction in the eye. Then he opened the folder, and this is where my mother tried one last time to win. She rose halfway out of her chair, and she did the thing she'd done my entire life, the thing that had always worked in this town, at this table, with these people. She made it about me being difficult. I'm so sorry, she said to David Albrecht with a warm, embarrassed laugh, the church laugh, the one that told a room not to take a thing seriously. Susanna has always had a competitive streak with her sister. It's been hard on her, never quite measuring up. I'm sure she's said some things to you, but you really do want Camilla. Camilla's the one in development. It was masterful in its way. In one sentence, she'd reframed everything David had said as the jealous fantasy of a bitter, lesser daughter. And the worst part, the part that made my stomach drop, was that I watched a few faces in the room nod, because they'd been told the same story for 30 years. The backup is jealous. The backup makes things up. The backup never quite measured up. For one cold second, I felt the whole thing tipping back toward her. That's the thing about a lie repeated for 30 years. It has gravity. It pulls a room back toward itself even when the truth is standing right there. David Albrecht looked at my mother for a long moment. Then he did the only thing that could have stopped that gravity. He didn't argue. He simply turned the open folder around and slid it to the center of the table, under the candles where everyone could see. This is the title to the building you're sitting in, Mrs. Beckett, he said quietly. Larkspur Properties, purchased 2 years ago. The owner of record is Beckett Holdings. Susanna Beckett, sole member. He turned a page. This is the deed to the 40 acres on the east side. Same owner, same daughter. He turned a page. And this is Mr. Holt's bid, the one your daughter Camilla put her name to, the one that names a strip retail center where the cancer hospital would go. He looked up, mild as a man reading a weather report. I didn't fly here to argue about which of your daughters is gifted. I flew here because on Thursday, your town council votes on whether to let one daughter destroy what the other one built. I thought they should know the whole story before they did. The gravity broke. I felt the room come back the way a tide comes back. The nodding stopped. My mother sat down slowly, and the church laugh died in her throat. Here is where my family still expected me to do what they'd trained me to do my whole life. Stay small. Let the powerful man speak for me. Be grateful to be mentioned. Instead, I stood up. I want to be careful telling this part, because it's the part the algorithm loves and the part I almost regret. There's a difference between justice and a show. I'd promised myself I'd stay on the right side of it, so I didn't shout. I didn't even raise my voice. I just stood, and the room, which had spent the evening looking past me, finally had nowhere else to look. Mr. Albrecht is being kind, I said. I'd like to fill in the part he left out. My father's mouth opened. Susanna, this isn't the... It's exactly the place, Dad. Calm. Level. You retired tonight in a building you've worked in for 40 years. You should know who owns it. I let that sit, the way my mother had let her one of them sit. 2 years ago, this clinic was 8 months from closing. The building's holding company was going to sell to Cascade and you'd have been out. So I bought the holding company. Quietly. I held your rent flat. I fixed the roof you complained about. You retired tonight as a respected man because the backup made sure the floor didn't come out from under you. You just never knew the floor was mine. You could have heard a candle gutter. I turned to Camilla. This was the part I'd flown 2,000 miles to do, and I did it gently, which made it worse for her. And I knew that, and I did it anyway. And you, Camilla, you took a finder's fee from a man in the city to help him kill a hospital. You didn't even read what you were selling. You never do. The senior partner's words, finally home. You could always sell a building you didn't understand. This time it was mine. Camilla's face did something I'd never seen it do. It stopped performing. For one naked second, she wasn't the gifted one or the star or my mother's masterpiece. She was a 38-year-old woman who'd just learned in front of 40 people that the sister she'd toasted as the rest of us had been holding the ceiling over her parents' heads for 2 years. "That's not," she started. "I didn't know it was your—" "I know you didn't," I said. "That was always the difference between us, Camilla. You never knew. I always did." Now came the waves I hadn't planned, the ones that made it real. The senior colleague who'd praised my father's steady hands cleared his throat. His name was Walt Henley, and he'd sat on the town council for 20 years. "Camilla," he said slowly, "you walked me through that East Side bid last month. You sat in my living room. You told me it was good for the town." I was told it was." "You told me," he repeated, "it would bring jobs." He looked at me, then back at her, and the warmth drained out of his face. "It would have killed the hospital." I watched Camilla try to find the smile that had carried her through every room of her life, and I watched it fail her for the first time. There was nothing under it. There had never been anything under it. That was the secret the spotlight had kept even from her. The second wave came from the back. An old man stood up slowly, leaning on the chair in front of him. Mr. Pearson, the farmer who'd signed Holt's letter of intent over coffee because the gifted one had known him since she sang in the choir. "Camilla," he said, and his voice shook, but not with weakness. "You sat at my kitchen table. You told me and Ruth that road of ours would help build something good. You let us think we were helping the town." He turned his old face toward me, then back to her. "We signed because of you, because we trusted a Beckett girl." He shook his head once. "I'll be at that meeting Thursday. I'll be telling them to tear that letter up." A murmur ran the length of the table. The Pearsons' road was the whole game, and everyone in that room who understood land understood it in the same instant. Without the Pearsons, Holt had nothing. Camilla had nothing. The thing she'd been hired to deliver had just stood up on 2 trembling legs and walked away from her in front of the whole county. Then the third wave, and this one wasn't about the deal at all. A woman near the front stood. The pharmacist, Mara, whose husband had driven 2 hours each way for chemo every week for a year until he was too weak to make the drive and stopped going. "There's going to be a cancer center?" she asked the room. To no one, to everyone. Her voice cracked on the word cancer. "Here? People won't have to drive to the city?" "No," I said. "They won't. A cancer center, a birthing center, and a free clinic for anyone who can't pay. It breaks ground in the fall." Somewhere behind Mara, a man's voice said, "Rough. My wife drives the city every Tuesday." And another, quieter, near the back. "My dad did, before." For a moment, the room filled with the soft arithmetic of every long drive every family in that county had ever made toward help that was always too far, and the slow understanding of who had just decided those drives would end. Mara put her hand over her mouth. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. Half the room knew her husband. Half the room had driven the same road for the same reason, for a parent, a child, a spouse. 90 minutes each way toward help that was always too far, and every one of them understood all at once what the daughter by the kitchen door had quietly built and what the daughter at the head of the table had been paid to tear down. And that was the moment the room turned, not toward Camilla, not even, really, toward me, toward the thing I'd built. One by one, they understood that the daughter at the kitchen door had quietly handed their town the one thing it had begged for across 2 generations, while the daughter who got the toast and the seat of honor had taken a stranger's money to take it away. Camilla tried then to do what my mother had taught her. She tried to make herself the victim of the room. "You set me up," she said to me, and her voice climbed, and the practiced warmth was gone, and what came out underneath was something I'd never been allowed to see. Panic. "You knew." You knew the whole time, and you let me walk in here, and you let me give that toast. You let me—" She was shaking. Who does that to their own sister? It was a good move. For 1 second, I felt the room considerate, the way rooms do. The cold sister. The ambush. Maybe Camilla was the wronged one after all. "I asked you yesterday," I said quietly, "if you'd read what you signed. In Mom's kitchen. You told me to just be happy for you." I looked at her, and I made myself say it without heat, because heat was what she needed and I wouldn't give it to her. "I gave you the door, Camilla. You patted me on the head and walked past it. I didn't set you up. I just stopped catching you. I just stopped catching you." I watched that land on her, and I watched her understand, maybe for the first time in her life, that someone had been catching her all along. She turned to our father for rescue. It was instinct. 38 years of instinct. Whenever Camilla fell, our father caught her, and our mother cushioned the landing, and the backup swept up whatever broke. But our father wasn't looking at Camilla. For the first time in either of our lives, at the sound of one daughter in distress, Gerald Beckett was looking at the other one. My mother was crying now. But I'd watched my mother cry my whole life, and I knew the kinds. This wasn't grief for what she'd done to me. This was grief at being wrong in public. There's a difference, and after 36 years I could tell them apart in the dark. She tried one more angle, the last one she had. "After everything we did for you," she said, dabbing her eyes, pivoting to the thing that had always worked. "We raised you, we fed you, we clothed you, Her voice found its footing on the old reliable rail. "We did our best with two such different girls. Camilla just needed more. Some children do. That's not a crime." "No," I agreed. "It's not a crime. You're right that Camilla needed more. I just never understood why the more always had to come out of me. I let that sit. You didn't have one star and one backup, Mom. You had 2 daughters. You just decided when I was a baby which one of us was the prize and which one of us was the price. And you never once checked your math." "Susanna," she said, reaching across the table. "Sweetheart, why didn't you tell us? Why would you let us all this time think—" And there it was, the question that explained everything. "Because you never asked, Mom." Quiet, final. "In 36 years, not one of you ever asked what I actually did. You decided who I was when I was 9, and you never once checked if you were right. I won't pretend the rest of the night was clean. It wasn't." My father stood, and for a moment I thought foolishly that 36 years were about to end with him saying my name the way he said Camilla's. He looked at me, his eyes were wet, and he said, "You let me believe I'd built that clinic myself. Even now it was about him." "You did build it, Dad," I said. "I just kept it standing. Those are different jobs. I know which one nobody claps for." David Albrecht, still beside me, gathered the pages back into his folder and closed it. He didn't need them anymore. He'd brought them the way you bring an umbrella you hope you won't have to open. The deeds had stopped my mother's lie cold. Everything after that, the room had done on its own. Before I tell you how it ended and what I decided to do about Thursday's town council vote, I want to say something to you, the one watching this. Maybe you were the backup. Maybe somewhere there's a table where they still seat you near the kitchen door. I want you to hear the next part very carefully, because it's the part that took me 20 years to learn, and it has nothing to do with revenge. Here is how it ended. For a moment after I stopped talking, nobody at that table moved. 40 people who had spent the evening, spent 30 years, sorting 2 sisters into a star and a backup, sat in the wreckage of a story they'd all helped tell. My father lowered himself back into his chair at the head of the table, and he looked, suddenly, like what he was. An old man who'd just learned he'd been kept safe for 2 years by the daughter he'd spent his life keeping at arm's length. Walt Henley was the first to come to me. He didn't say much. He put his weathered hand on my shoulder, the council member who'd been about to vote my hospital out of existence, and he said, "Your grandmother would be proud. I knew her. She'd be proud." And then he said the thing that nearly broke the composure I'd held all night. "I'm sorry we never saw you, Susanna. You were right here the whole time. You were right here the whole time." I had to look at the candles for a second. 36 years of standing 3 feet to the left of the spotlight, and the first person to simply turn his head and see me was a man who almost voted me into the dark forever. 2 days too late to have ever known he'd been on the wrong side. Mara came next, the pharmacist. She didn't say anything about the deal at all. She took both my hands, the hands that had pulled the records and read the leases and signed the deeds, and she held them, and her eyes were wet, and I understood she was thinking about a man who'd stopped going to chemo because the drive was too far. Some debts you can't pay back. You can only build something so the next person doesn't have to owe it. Camilla left before dessert. She didn't slam anything. She just gathered her $1,000 coat and walked out into the parking lot. And through the window, I watched the gifted one stand alone under the lights, calling someone who didn't pick up. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the strange, flat sadness of finally seeing clearly. My whole life I'd thought Camilla had something I didn't. She didn't. She just had the spotlight. And the spotlight had told her she was warm when she was only lit. In the days after, the truth kept unfolding, the way truth does once you finally pull the first thread. Walt Henley called me the next morning. He'd gone home and looked up Holt, the city developer. It turned out Holt had done this in 4 other small towns, promised a town center, delivered a half-empty strip of payday lenders and a vape shop, and moved on. In 2 of those towns, he'd used a local front, a trusted face, to walk the council through it. Camilla wasn't the first. She was just the cheapest. Holt paid her a flat fee and a title that sounded enormous and meant nothing, because a desperate person who needs to feel important is the easiest hire there is. My mother had spent 30 years manufacturing exactly that desperation in her favorite child, and a stranger from the city had finally found a use for it. Then the harder card turned, the one about Camilla's real life. The county is small, and after the dinner, people talked, and the version my mother had sold for years came apart in a week. There was no firm, there was no title. There was a studio apartment 2 months behind on rent, a phone that kept ringing from numbers Camilla stopped answering, and a younger sister she'd toasted as the rest of us while standing on the edge of bankruptcy. The gifted one had been drowning quietly for 4 years, in the city, alone, performing solvency the way she'd performed everything, and our parents had been too busy admiring the performance to notice she was going under. I didn't gloat over that. I want to be honest with you. When I learned how broke and frightened my sister actually was, the old reflex woke up, the one trained into me before I could walk. Fix it. Catch her. Quietly write the check, the way the backup always does, so the family stays standing and nobody has to know who held it up. I didn't write the check. That was the hardest thing I did in the whole story, harder than the land, harder than the dinner. I let my sister be exactly as in trouble as she actually was, because catching her one more time wouldn't have saved her. It would only have let everyone keep believing she'd never fallen. The town council met that Thursday. Walt Henley read Holt's record into the minutes. The Pearsons stood up and asked to tear up their letter, and the council let them. The rezoning died 11 votes to nothing. The competing bid collapsed the way a tent collapses when you pull the one pole holding it. Camilla withdrew her name in writing the next morning, which told me she'd finally, for once, read something all the way through. The campus broke ground in the fall. There's a women's center going in on the east edge of town now, under the water tower, on the land where my grandmother would have lived if the hospital had been 10 minutes closer instead of 90. There's a free clinic, the charity wing I'd spent 2 years insisting on, the one David's board fought me over because charity wings don't pencil out. They pencil out fine. You just have to want the right thing more than you want the margin. I named the charity wing after her, not after myself. The backup doesn't need her name on things. That was always Camilla's hunger, never mine. My father called me a month later. I almost didn't pick up. When I did, there was a long silence, the kind he used to fill with the weather, and then he said, "I drove out to the east side today, to see the land, where they're building." "Okay," I said. "There's a sign up. Says the Women's Center is named for your grandmother." His voice did something I'd never heard it do. It thinned. "My mother. You named it for my mother. She died in a car, Dad, on the way to a hospital that was too far. I didn't want anyone else's to." He was quiet for a while. Then he asked me a question. An actual question. He asked what I did all day, what my company was, how I'd learned it, how a girl he'd called the backup at 9 years old had quietly bought the ground his own mother should have been saved on. He asked at 68, for the first time in my life, who I actually was. It wasn't an apology. People like my father rarely manage those. The word gets stuck somewhere behind 40 years of being right. But it was the first time he treated me like a person he was curious about instead of a role he'd assigned when I was small and never re-examined. I'll take a real question over a hollow apology any day of the week. So I answered him. I told him about the garage and the space heater and the 11 buildings and the lease that reads like an X-ray. He listened. He actually listened. We talk now, sometimes, carefully, like two people learning a language late, knowing they'll never be fluent, deciding to try anyway. Camilla and I don't talk. Not out of cruelty on either side. There's just nothing yet to say that wouldn't be a performance, and we're both done performing for each other. Maybe someday. She did one thing, though, that I think about. 3 weeks after the dinner, a small envelope came to my office. Inside was the $400. No note. Just the bills, and in the corner of the empty page, in her looping, confident hand, the year I was 16. She'd remembered the summer program. After 30 years, the gifted one had finally read something all the way to the end, and it was me. My mother and I are not in contact. She sent a long letter about how hard it had been to raise 2 such different girls, how she'd done her best, how Camilla had needed more support. It was 4 pages, and it never once asked how I was. I keep it in a drawer, the same drawer in spirit where my report cards used to go. Here's the thing I flew 2,000 miles to understand, and the thing I want to leave you with. For 30 years, I thought the cruelty was being called the backup. It wasn't. The cruelty was that I believed them. I spent my childhood and half my adulthood trying to earn a seat at the head of a table that was never going to give me one, when the whole time I had the power to build my own table, in my own building, on my own land, and seat whoever I chose. So this is what I'd tell you. If you were sitting near my kitchen door tonight, stop trying to be seen by people committed to looking past you. Go build the thing only you can see. Quiet isn't the same as small. The ones who watch from 3 feet to the left of the spotlight are the ones who learn how the whole room actually works. And one day, when it matters, you'll be the only one in the room who knows where the floor is. My sister raised a glass to the daughter who made something of herself. She was right. She just had the wrong daughter. I'm Susanna Beckett, and I was never the backup. I was the foundation. They just couldn't see me because they were standing on me the whole time.